everybody. My name is Joe. And my presentation will be about media reporting in the Philippines and some initiatives in the Asia-Pacific region as far as climate change is concerned. And hopefully we'll relate what the implications of these are to journalism education. And in conclusion, I hope I can show you a video which I hope you will all appreciate in tribute to our beautiful environment. Okay. Dealing with climate change has been more urgent in a country like the Philippines, described as a climate hotspot, and very vulnerable to some of the worst manifestations of climate change. In fact, the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction and Global Climate Risk Index 2016 identified the Philippines as one of 5 countries globally most affected by the bigger number of weather-related calamities. We are number 4 behind the US, China, and India. You must, of course, remember Super Typhoon Haiyan. My colleague, Dr. Chris Maslog, earlier referred to that particular super typhoon where officially there were about more than 6,000 people were killed, but there were thousands of missing persons and the number of houses that were destroyed and the total amount of damages to agriculture. Okay. To deal with climate change and its impact, public awareness and understanding, of course, is very critical. In Asia, the level of awareness of people experiencing effects of climate change is very high. Government, NGOs, local communities, and media all contribute to rising public awareness. That's according to a study by Climate Asia BBC Media Action Survey. BBC stands for the British Broadcasting Corporation, of course you all know. And the study also says that radio and television are the most desired platforms for public awareness and understanding of climate change. But there are gaps in their reporting. They were saying, or in this study, that content is not always clear and relevant. Less than half of those surveyed are less informed on how to respond to changes in the climate. They actually interviewed some 33,000 people in those countries: India, China, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Nepal, Vietnam, and I think Indonesia as well. And these were some of the findings. So this is available on the net if you want to find out also what the information needs of people in those countries as far as climate change is concerned. So the depth of understanding is wanting, and less than half of those surveyed are less informed on how to respond to changes in the climate. In the Philippines, the level of public awareness is also high. That's according to a government's agency called the Philippine Commission on Climate Change, but it adds what is extremely lacking is the depth of understanding of climate change issues. Broadcast media is partly responsible for raising public awareness. On Philippine radio and television, we see a variety of formats. Here I give you some examples of packaged news reports. The first one is a story about this lamp that is run using seawater. And it's available in coastal communities, and also it can be used for charging mobile phones. The media buzz about this seawater lamp came about when President Obama came to the Philippines for the AMIC Summit in November 2015. And in an entrepreneurship seminar, he actually endorsed the seawater lamp and asked the head of this company called Alibaba, if you're aware of this, to fund the manufacture of this seawater lamp. And the guy said, yes, we will fund it. And the other one that, of course, created a lot of publicity, particularly in broadcast, is the celebration of Earth Hour. I guess you guys know the Earth Hour celebration as well. We also see occasional stories, people stories about how coastal communities are dealing with the effects of climate change. And the media company where I work with, CNN Philippines, has done some people stories about the victims of Super Typhoon Haiyan in some of the provinces in the Philippines. We also have television documentaries that tackle the global climate issue and the alarming fluctuations in the planet's temperature. They also show how families grapple with the effects of global warming. So these are some examples of the documentaries. One is called Warmer. And this lady, this picture below, is a celebrity in the Philippines. And so they use celebrities to be able to widen the audience reach. This one, buhos, is a Tagalog term that means downpour. And it's a two-part documentary series that was produced by a celebrity as well, but she belongs to the Philippine Senate. Her name is Loren Legarda, and she is the foremost, #1 advocate of the environment or climate change in the Philippines. As far as radio is concerned, they have also done the bit in terms of showing public service announcements. We also have a regular weekly program in one of the major television or radio networks. It's called Red Alert, basically on disaster preparedness. Aside from reporting on stories about climate change and disaster preparedness, this program also engages in an exhibit on a yearly basis. Again, focus on disaster preparedness, and also, they also sponsor a fun run for the environment. This is done on a yearly basis. So they're doing a lot in terms of raising awareness about disaster preparedness as well as climate change. Broadcast media also does online platforms, and here's an example of one online platform. It's called I Am Ready, where it keeps people up to date with both the traffic conditions and any natural disaster alerts. It also offers information for preparations for disasters. It has an interactive flood mapping for Metro Manila to assist the public and journalists in reporting situations in disaster risk areas in the metropolis. So when it comes to assessing the media reporting of climate change in the Philippines, government, academe, nonprofit organizations, as well as journalists offer a mixed verdict. So let me give you some ideas on how these sectors look at media reporting on climate change. So what does government say? And basically from the Philippine Commission on Climate Change, the Philippine Commission on Climate Change is the government body that's in charge of conceptualizing, undertaking strategies to deal with climate change. So it gave it a high mark, actually a grade of 7 in a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being the highest. It gave media reporting on climate change a high of 7. And they were saying that coverage has gone beyond the capital, Manila. So there's some coverage in the provinces as well. However, content ranges from superficial to in-depth. There are also, they say that they lack stories of the past, showing that there has been indeed something different. Victories won in terms of dealing with climate change, and also lack stories about global concerns. The National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council cites also another lapse in terms of media reporting. It has to do with ethical reporting. In an interview, the communications manager of this government agency said, some media organizations tend to push government agencies to release disaster statistics even before verification is completed so that they can be first to report ahead of their competition. Let me go now to academe. They're not so happy as well. Here's one from Professor Ben G. Domingo of the Central Luzon State University. And he says disaster risk stories are mostly event incident oriented, lacks backgrounding and insufficient contextualization. It often tends to go for sensational angles, a lot of tearjerkers, and seldom investigative. Another professor from the University of the Philippines, Professor Luis Teodoro, who was former dean of the University of the Philippines, and he says that what is missing is a sense of urgency that should drive every citizen to prepare and take action. The imperative of citizen self-help and self-organization as a key factor in the acceleration of the pace of rehabilitation and the views of affected communities and the private groups engaged in rehab efforts, media being focused solely on government views, policies, and efforts. He also urges media to continue to monitor and critique government agencies in fulfilling their responsibilities before, during, and after. What about nonprofit organizations or non-government organizations? The Movement for Climate Change, an organization of 103 national networks, alliances, and local organizations in the Philippines, is saying that coverage intensified after Super Typhoon Haiyan. And he says that, but however, content is not holistic. It fails to connect disasters and climate change. Not much discussion on the whys or the reasons for the intense flooding and strong winds taking place. Another nonprofit organization is called the Center for Media Freedom and Democracy, and they made a content analysis of print and broadcast reporting in the aftermath of Super Typhoon Haiyan. And what were their findings? Let me just cite a few of them. And they said that media provided enough space and time, particularly in highlighting the strength and damage of Haiyan, the urgent need for food and potable water, and government response to the needs of those affected, as well as the flow of local and foreign donations, among others. The media also serve as heartbreaking news or quickly scribbled reassurances. Survivors put their pleas into writing and gave them to the journalists assigned in the area with the hope that their messages will reach those they were intended for. Coverage also showed the risk reporters took to deliver the news and help the victims. It also highlighted the network's relief-owned operations, and these relief operations became very visible in their news programs, understandably. But there have been some lapses in fact-finding or in fact-checking and in providing critical information, for instance, about the phenomenon of storm surge. Not too many people in the affected areas knew what the storm surge is. And even before the Super Typhoon hit the Philippines, the government agency or the Weather Bureau has been giving information about the storm surge. So it's very different from a tsunami and a tidal wave, but broadcast media failed to give enough information on this particular scientific word, and that, I guess, contributed towards the unpreparedness of the Philippines about the storm surge. And also another thing that they found out was that when they interviewed the scientists, they were not talking in layman's terms, so that made it more difficult for the listeners to understand what was happening. So what about the journalists themselves, including me? What do they say about media reporting on climate change? The Philippine Network of Environmental Journalists says coverage is generally poor, but improving. An assessment I tend to agree with. There are more disaster narratives, less stories on how people are being affected and how they adapt or find solutions. Less focus on Philippine role and responsibilities under UN climate change negotiations. Most often, the President said, most often climate change as a new subject in the Philippines is treated as part of disaster reportage or doomsday scenarios, observes the President, Mrs. Imelda Abano. Several factors account for this. The lack of space or backing from editors, competitors against other priority news items, mostly politics, demands of commercialism, lack of resources to cover, and the lack of deep depth of understanding of media practitioners on climate change. In terms of training or making media practitioners more knowledgeable about climate change, there has been some initiatives towards making them more aware. And one of the initiatives comes from the Philippine agricultural journalists. So they have gone to several provinces to share information about climate change, disaster preparedness, so on and so forth. And they are supported by other nonprofit organizations, by banks as well, who support them, as well as private companies who are involved in energy-related industries. So they share information with the agricultural sector to improve adaptive capacities. In Asia Pacific, there have been organizations, media development organizations, that have also initiated initiatives on climate change. Let me just cite a few of them. AMIC, for instance, the Asia Pacific Institute for Broadcast Development, and the Asia Pacific Broadcasting Union, based in Kuala Lumpur. They have been undertaking initiatives, and basically the elements of their initiatives were: one, mostly in-country workshops; number two, regional workshops and training workshops as well. They also conduct awards for science and the environment. And this is a website, this is one program that it's a 4-year program supported by the Asian Development Bank, supported by ADB, by SIDA, and it's called Redraw the Line. And here you see some of the outputs that they had. This is the AIBD in Kuala Lumpur. So they have the World TV Award category every year since 2011. They have had regional workshops on climate change and environmental programs, and another workshop as well. And the other initiatives comes from the ABU, and here they have also a lot of workshops, in fact about 30 of them since 2011. And the latest one was the Krabi Media Action Plan in 2016. I think this was in Slovenia, where the broadcasters from Asia Pacific came out with an action plan, again to support climate change initiatives for broadcasters in the region. So having presented this, what do they all mean to journalism education? So these are some of the ideas I came out with in terms of journalism education. One, the pursuit of good journalism principles remains a key objective. That means sticking to the demands of accuracy, fairness, offering context and background. Framing news angles should see climate change not simply as an environmental issue. It has social, political, economic, and human rights dimensions. So news angles can include health, business, technology, food, culture, sport, tourism, religion, politics, in fact, almost everything. The pursuit of good journalism also requires a renewed commitment that we serve the public. How? By providing people relevant information and communicating a climate change language understood by doctors, professors, construction drivers, engineers, farmers, etc., etc. Two, promoting and strengthening media's watchdog function that can serve lives, influence policy, and empower people to make informed choices. How? By tracking implementation of climate change initiatives, examining the delivery on promises and commitments, scrutinizing particular agencies and actors in each sector. Such watchdog role should also look at mitigation, financing, and adaptation strategies of both public and private actors, keeping track of money for various initiatives, where money is going and how is it being used, making governments and leaders accountable from the grassroots to the national level. Three is really enriching instructional materials. There are just so many video materials available at AIBD and ABU, which, if we can initiate collaboration between schools and these media development organizations, we can actually strengthen or increase our instructional materials in schools. Schools can also initiate, for instance, student awards on climate change as part of public awareness. The other thing is radio remains a major platform to reach out to wider audiences for climate change, not only in the Philippines, but I guess in many Asia-Pacific countries, and thus must continue to be part of journalism education. Students must be reminded that in producing radio programs, their strategy should focus on inviting their listeners in, making them feel special and valued, creating emotional connections, and offering them rewards. Television, like radio, is a major platform as well for audiences on climate change. For students of broadcast journalism, good visuals is as important as a good news script. It equals actually good communication. Learning how to produce various formats to attract attention is critical. Television news reports make more sense if climate change is humanized so that people can relate to what its impact and opportunities are. So what clicks among viewers and listeners, especially among young people? At the Asia Media Summit in Korea last May, where I attended that summit, producers, editors, and program specialists suggest people's stories that depict problems and solutions in dealing with adaptation initiatives, diverse documentary modes such as poetic, expository, participatory, observational modes, and for the young, infographics, comics, and animations. The program should also be produced in the mother tongue and other important dialects. I think the whole message is so much has yet to be done in terms of media reporting in the Philippines and in terms of journalism education addressing media development, climate change. Let me conclude my presentation with this short video, and I'm sure you will enjoy it. This actually is a winning performance, and my message here is to highlight creativity, which I think media practitioners need to convince editors to do more reporting about climate change. Creativity in terms of producing better visuals so that more people can watch and really relate to climate change issue. And this is performed by the El Gama Penumbra, a Filipino all-male shadow play group that won the first season of Asia's Got Talent in Singapore in 2015. It's a tribute to the environment, which I think is a fitting end to my presentation. And it uses the song Colors of the Wind from Pocahontas. Thank you, George.